The Romanesque route is a set of three routes that take us back to the time of foundation of nationality in the valleys of the rivers Sousa, Tâmega, and Douro, and the role of nobility and the religious orders in the construction of the national territory. It was on the Romanesque route that noble families and religious orders helped build Portugal, and that history is inscribed in 58 Romanesque monuments erected between the 11th and 14th centuries.
This route can be divided into three routes that connect each other by road, following the river valleys: Sousa Valley Route, Tâmega Valley Route, and Douro Valley Route. We decided to concentrate on the monuments of the Sousa Valley Route. So, let's start our virtual tour.
The monastery of Santa Maria de Pombeiro was one of the most important Benedictine monasteries of Entre Douro e Minho from the 12th century. Founded by D. Gomes Equives and his wife Gondra in 1102, it originated from an old monastic community. Despite the extensive work that was done in the 7th and 18th centuries, it still retains the plan, the apse, and the main portion from its medieval foundation. The capitals of the main Portugal are a remarkable example of Romanesque sculpture.
The Church of San Vicente de Sousa was part of a conventual ensemble, whose construction was completed in the 13th century, as attested by the inscription next to the north portal. The main portion has 3 pairs of columns and 4 archivolts. The tympan has, as decoration, a cross of the Order of Malta.
The original construction of the Church of Salvador de União dates from the 12th century, and its design was established by Master Cisaldo. Sacred in 1165 by the Archbishop of Braga, Dom João Peculiar, it would only be completed in the 13th century. It is a testimony of Portuguese Romanesque architecture. The main portal has a set of vegetal capitals, considered among the best carved of all Romanesque in northern Portugal.
The Veiga Bridge is an example of Gothic crossing, whose construction period is likely to be in the first half of the 15th century. Its execution is probably due to the abbots of Pombeiro Monastery in Felgueiras. The Veiga Bridge falls into the category of parish or municipal crossing, ensuring the circulation and flow between the fertile fields of the Sousa River.
The Church of Santa Maria de Aranjuez has probably been patronized by noblemen and the presentation of the Archbishop of Braga in the 13th century, becoming a royal patronage linked to the Order of Avis in 1394 until it became a commendation of the Order of Christ in 1517. The importance of each of these patrons was evident in the various phases of construction and remodeling that shaped the temple we see today.
The oldest document reference to the Church of São Mamede Vila Verde dates from 1220. It was part of the patronage of the monastery of Santa Maria de Pombeiro. The vestiges of mural painting show that the wall of the headboard was painted in a manner of an altar, where representations of São Bento and probably São Bernardo are identified.
The Villa Tower, more than a military construction, is a symbol of the lordly power over the territory. It testifies the existence of the strong house, the fortified manorial residence in the Sousa Valley. It would have been built between the end of the 13th century and the beginning of the 14th century. According to inquiries from 1258, Santa Maria de Vilar was the honor of Dom Gil Martins and his descendants, from the Riba Vizelas family.
The Church of Aveleda has a very simple structure and is a witness to the persistence of Romanesque forms in Portuguese medieval architecture. It has elements of a very late appearance, symptomatic of a construction that is unlikely to be prior to the beginning of the 14th century.
Difficult to date, the Vilela Bridge may have been built in the period of increasing circulation needs in the Sousa Valley, the 13th century, to overcome the natural obstacle constituted by the Sousa River. This type of bridge is directly inspired by the Roman building tradition, from which it inherited a practical knowledge of highly resistant construction.
The construction of the Church of Santa Maria de Medo dates from the 13th century, has architectural and decorative features marked by great simplicity, but of great historical and artistic value too. According to tradition, this Romanesque building replaced another temple, founded before the Arab occupation of the peninsula, where the relics of Saint Tirso would have been deposited.
The Espindo Bridge, which is difficult to date, is a medieval bridge of transition, later than the Vilela Bridge, with a trestle deck that attests to its Gothic rather than Romanesque character. At one end of the bridge are some alminhas, little souls, religious pieces associated with ancient Portuguese roads and the symbolic protection of travels.
Church of the Monastery of São Pedro de Ferreira is a remarkable rural Romanic construction that dates back to the 12th century. This monument is one of the most singular Portuguese Romanesque monuments, being a typical example of an ecclesiastical establishment with agrarian roots. This structure will correspond to the end church of funerary function.
The Tower of the Alcofarage would have its function of surveillance, or dungeon, besides being a dwelling and a sign of the nobility of its owners. It is representative of a type of manorial housing that marked the Portuguese Middle Ages, at least until it encountered resistance from the royal power. The two Gothic windows in the tower stand out. These elements allow us to date the structure to the 14th century.
To this, Senhora da Piedade da Quinta Chapel, two designations are attributed, resulting of two invocations born in the medieval times, Senhora da Piedade and Senhora da Quinta. Both invocations had, however, the same mission, to defend the agriculture area of the historic honor of Baltar, in which the chapel was integrated. From the medieval period, the small main chapter remains exquisitely decorated. Inside, the careful carving of the stone stands out, reflecting the intervention of the modern area that added a nave.
The foundation of the monastery of São Pedro de Sete, with its traditional tributes to Dom Gonçalo of Cax, dates back to the 10th century. Despite the reform of the Gothic era, this church is a testimony to the long acceptance of Romanesque standards. If the north side Porto can be considered Gothic, the main Porto has aspects of the late Romanesque. In the cloisters, some well-preserved tomb chests of noble knights are worth mentioning.
This castle was located in the defensive network of the territorial to which the kings of Asturias paid a lot of attention. In 995, it was attacked by Almanzor in his advances towards Braga and Compostela, in the context of reconquest. It headed a land in the reorganization of the territory in the 11th century and an import court already in the 13th century. At the end of this century, the castle of Aguiar de Sousa will have been abandoned.
The Ermida of Nossa Senhora do Val presents a typical construction from the end of the 5th century and the beginning of the 6th century. It conserves vestiges of mural painting attributed to the master Arnaus with representations of musical angels. The presentation of the pulpit outside the Ermida is to be understood in the context of the pilgrimage, since the great affluence of the faithful meant that the celebration had to take place outdoors.
The first references to the monastery date back to 994 in the will of Abbot Randolph, who fled from a monastery further south during Almanzor's incursions. The monastery is linked to the Ribadouros family, from which comes Egas Muniz, the famous tutor of King Afonso Henriques. In 1186, Egas Muniz left half of his fortune to the monastery, indicating that he would be buried there. His tomb arch is one of the most beautiful pieces of national Romanesque sculpture, where scenes from the life of his tutor are carved.
The Ermida Memorial corresponds to a type of monument of which only 6 are left in Portugal. These monuments are probably related both to the settings of graves and to the evocation of someone's memory, as well as to the passage of funeral processions. Legend has it that this memory was a stopping point during the transport of the body of Dona Mafalda, daughter of Dom Sancho I, to the monastery of Aroca.
Ermida Memorial, our virtual tour by this Sousa Valley inspiring route, full of history and monuments of Romanesque origin, comes to an end. We hope you enjoy it.